quoted part of it in the prayer of confession. So our first text today is 1 Samuel 25, and we're reading 1 to 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him at his home in Ramah. And then David got up and went down to the wilderness of Paran. There was a man in Maon whose property was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful, but the man was surly and mean. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, so David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. Thus you shall say and salute him, 'Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time that they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, they'll tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your sight, for we have come on feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David.' When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have butchered from my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where?' So David's young men turned away, came back, and told David all of this. And David said to his men, 'Every man strap on his sword,' and every one of them strapped on their sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up with David, while 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, 'David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he shouted insults at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. We never missed anything when we were in the fields, as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us, both night and day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do, for evil has been decided against our master and against all his house. He is so ill-natured that no one can speak to him.' Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 500 ready-dressed sheep, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her young men, 'Go on ahead of me. I'm coming after you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David was still making his case. 'Surely it was in vain that I protected all of this fellow had in his wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. But he has returned me evil for good. God does so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him.' When Abigail saw David, she hurried and alighted from the donkey, fell before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, 'Upon me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. My lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow Nabal, for as his name is so, he is foolish. His name and the folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance with your own hand, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be like Nabal, be foolish. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow you. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If anyone, I'm going to stop there. Did you notice how many times the word Lord is said and how confusing it gets? Because it's the same word as man and husband, and we just decide which we should translate it from time to time. This time they kept translating it Lord. Made it confusing. I just want to read a little bit from Romans 12. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it's possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. The word of the Lord. My sister Kristen gave me permission to tell this story. She has a green thumb, she loves the dirt, she's always got a vegetable garden going, she tends to all the plants around the perimeter of her home. When they moved to Lancaster, there were hostas that were flourishing around all the place, and then there was also this brambly rose bush that she struggled to keep at bay. And so one day while she was mowing the yard, she just decided, I'm going to pull this rose bush up, I can't take it anymore. And so her husband comes home and he sees the rose bush is gone and he goes, I think the technical term is berserk. What happened to the rose bush? And Kristen's like, that's hardly what one would call a rose bush. It was hideous and eyesore. I pulled it out. Why would you do that? And Kristen realizes that something's going on, so she asks, did you like the rose bush? And he says, yes! We live in Lancaster. It's the Red Rose City. We love it here. It reminds me that we love it here. And Kristen was stunned. She had no idea that he liked the rose bush. And so get this. The next time the lawn needed to be mowed, it was Walter out there with the mower. And out of spite, he pulled up the hostas by the light post. And so it's Kristen now. She comes home and she sees the devastation that is the patch of earth by the front light post. And when she enters the home, she finds a husband very satisfied with himself. An eye for an eye, or in this case, a plant for a plant. We are an interesting lot, us humans. They have a great relationship. They're loving, wonderful, and they have new rose bushes. But we each have a unique set of scales by which we determine what is right and wrong. Where is there kindness and peace we look for? Where is there injustice and meanness? Our story today reveals this ongoing judgment of right and wrong, humility, war, peace. The book begins with a lovely song by a woman who could not get pregnant. Her name was Hannah, and she sang, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. This book of 1st and 2nd Samuel focuses on three main figures. Samuel begins with the prophet who transitions the people from tribal nations to a unified Israel with an anointed king. And that's the second figure. Saul was the first king. And the book covers Saul's rise to power and his failures and then ultimately his demise. Now the drama of Saul's demise makes way for the third character, David. David begins as a general in Saul's army, and David is wildly successful, and Saul becomes wildly jealous of David. Saul begins hunting David, and we see here Saul, right, using his unique scales of justice and right and wrong and pride and humility and war and peace, and he decides that he is jealous and angry and must find and kill David. So David is being chased, and he hides in the wilderness with his men. And this story that we have here today comes from the time when he was in the wilderness. At the end of the chapter, there's like a few stories that just kind of lean back into the wilderness time. So it's sheep shearing season. There are shepherds who belong to Nabal. Like I said, his name means fool. They are shearing their sheep nearby David and his men in the wilderness. And it's David's perception that he and his men have kept the shepherds safe. Now, we don't know if that means that David and his men saved them from like wild animals or other dangers. It's also possible that they live in an era of animosity and disdain for anyone who is other. I can't imagine there's ever a time like that in the world. And maybe it would have been assumed that David and his men would quickly fight the shepherds, or that the shepherds would attack David and his men just because they were not the same. But yet, there's something in the story where these two people groups were able to live peaceably as neighbors. So it's in this hope of this peace that David's men approach the fool and ask him for food based on the goodwill of their relationship. But the fool dismisses David. Who's David? I don't know, David. There are all kinds of riffraff out there. I'm not wasting my food on strangers. There they are, right? These unique scales that we each have, that we judge on any different day. What's going right, what's going wrong. So David hears the fool's response, and what is his response? Strap on your swords, and the testosterone begins to flow, and the men are gaining strength for the battle ahead. And meanwhile, back at home, the home of the fool, there's a young man, also with his unique set of scales, determining what is right and wrong, what is happening here, where is there justice, where is there injustice. And so this young man tells Abigail what happened. Abigail, again, another person, just like you and me, who has a unique set of scales, where we listen to what's happening and we judge what is right and what is wrong, what is the appropriate response. Abigail decides 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. Abigail decides a feast is appropriate to what has happened. She does not tell the fool. She sends the food ahead of her, and as David and your men, do you see this scene? David and his men are coming toward her, swords at the ready. We still hear David making his case. He has returned evil for my good. God help me if I am one man. What are the scales of judgment here? We've got anger and vengeance and pride and entitlement. David gets lost in his fury of vengeance, and Abigail, here she comes approaching. She gets off the donkey. She bows before him. What are the scales of judgment there with Abigail? We've got courage and vulnerability and wisdom and a drive for peace. And she says to David, please hear me. Do not take this fool seriously. Had the young men come to me, there would be none of this bloodthirst. Instead, here's a gift. Can you hear it now? Because David is pulling out his scales from his bag and reassessing the situation. Where is there right? Where is there wrong? What is the appropriate response? David said, blessed be your good sense. You have restrained me from hurting you. And David sends her away in peace. So what do we think of our own scales? We each have a set, and then we as a community have a set. Do our scales tip toward pride, or do they tip toward peace? Do we place more weight on right or wrong, or do we place more weight on wrong than right? Do you catch that? In other words, does it mean more to you if someone's kind to you? Does that weigh more than if someone is cruel? Or if someone's cruel, does that matter more than if they are kind? Which do we weight more? And here's the big question, though. Are our scales adjusted to the ways of God? Or are they adjusted to what I prefer, what we prefer? Because it was Hannah in the very beginning of the book. Remember? She's the one who told us how to adjust our scales to the ways of God. In the beginning she said, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And centuries later, Paul said it this way: as far as it depends on you, live at peace with all people, because vengeance belongs to the Lord. So it's not just about rose bushes and hostas. It's about pride and humility. It's about vengeance and peace. It's human nature to judge. Our work is to adjust our scales according to the ways of God. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. As far as it depends on you and me and us, let's live at peace with all people. Amen. As you are able, please stand with me and let's affirm our faith together.